0209 hours. The Strait of Hormuz, the narrowest choke point on Earth, 21 miles wide at its tightest, and tonight it is carrying 200,000 tons of crude oil in a single convoy column. The lead tanker, a fully loaded Suezmax, sits so deep in the water that its hull barely clears the seafloor at the shallowest point of the channel. Behind it, 4 more tankers move in single file, each one worth $250 million in cargo alone. The combined value of the oil moving through this strait in a single night exceeds the GDP of 17 countries. And right now, moving in the shadows 3 nautical miles off the convoy's starboard side, 4 Iranian Sina-class fast attack corvettes are accelerating toward intercept range. They have been planning this for 8 months. Their commanders believe they have chosen the perfect moment. The diplomatic window is closed. The escort formation protecting the convoy consists of a single Arleigh Burke-class destroyer, the USS Cole, and a single littoral combat ship operating in a supporting role. On paper, the math looks favorable to the IRGC. 4 armed corvettes against 2 escorts. A simultaneous missile launch from close range designed to saturate the destroyer's Aegis intercept capacity, disable the convoy's lead vessel, and demonstrate to the world that Iran controls the Strait of Hormuz when it decides to. The IRGC fleet commander, watching from the Coastal Operations Center in Bandar Abbas, is confident. He has run this scenario in simulation dozens of times. The numbers always come out the same way. He has no idea that the numbers he has been running are based on a version of the US Navy that no longer exists. What the Iranian corvette captains see on their radar screens is a destroyer, a littoral combat ship, and 5 slow-moving tankers. What they cannot see is the rest of the system. 41,000 feet above the convoy, an E-2D Advanced Hawkeye radar aircraft has been orbiting in complete silence for 6 hours, its rotating antenna scanning a circle of ocean 300 miles across. The Hawkeye does not belong to the destroyer. It does not operate on the destroyer's timeline. It is the elevated eye of a kill web that stretches from the surface of the Gulf to low Earth orbit, and it has been watching the Iranian corvettes since before they cleared their own harbor. Every course change, every speed adjustment, every radio transmission on every frequency those ships have used tonight has been logged, processed, and pushed down a secure data link to a tactical action officer aboard the USS Abraham Lincoln operating 200 miles away in the North Arabian Sea. Think of it this way. The Iranian fleet commander thinks he is watching a poker game from across the table. He has studied the other player's face, memorized the betting patterns, and calculated the odds. What he does not know is that someone has been reading his cards over his shoulder for the past 8 months and forwarding the information to the other side of the table before every hand is dealt. The IRGC corvettes reach their launch bearing at 0211 hours. The fleet commander gives the authorization. 4 ships, simultaneous fire. The NOR anti-ship missiles leave their rails in a coordinated salvo. 8 weapons in total, 2 from each corvette, skimming the water at 15 feet of altitude on a terminal approach that is designed to arrive at the convoy simultaneously from a spread of bearings. The geometry is elegant. Even a fully alert Aegis system has a finite number of engagements it can prosecute at one time. 8 simultaneous low-altitude inbounds from a spread formation is the Iranian answer to that limit. But the Iranian fleet commander made one critical calculation error. He assumed the USS Cole would be fighting alone. The E-2D Hawkeye detected the missile launches 4 seconds after ignition, before the weapons had traveled a single mile. Using Link 16, it pushed 8 separate target tracks simultaneously to the Aegis combat systems of the USS Cole and, through the Cooperative Engagement Capability network, to 2 additional warships that the Iranian corvettes had no knowledge of. The USS Gravely, a second Arleigh Burke destroyer, had been running dark under full emission control 60 miles to the northwest. The USS Monterey, a Ticonderoga-class guided missile cruiser, had been holding a position behind the tanker formation in the convoy's acoustic shadow, where Iranian radar could not distinguish its return from the tankers themselves. Both ships had been part of the escort package the entire night. Neither had turned on a single active emitter. They were invisible. Not because they were hiding, Because they were waiting. The three ships did not coordinate their response over voice radio. They did not wait for a human to manually assign targets and approve engagements. The Cooperative Engagement Capability architecture distributed the 8 inbound tracks across the three ships' magazines automatically, calculated the optimal intercept geometry for each weapon based on current position and closure rate, and generated firing solutions before any commanding officer had finished reading the threat summary on his screen. The system assigned targets. The system allocated missiles. The system fired. From the Iranian fleet commander's perspective, what happened next was impossible. Missiles erupted from 3 different points on the horizon simultaneously, not from one destroyer. From 3 warships spread across a 20-mile arc of ocean, all of them engaging with weapons, guided by a single shared targeting picture that none of them had generated independently. The SM-6 interceptors off the USS Cole handled the 2 western inbounds. The SM-2 Block 3IB rounds off the Gravely took the northern pair. The Monterey's VLS cells fired on the remaining 4. Every Iranian missile was assigned a dedicated interceptor before any of them had covered half the distance to the convoy. The intercepts happened in a window of 9 seconds. 8 separate detonations lit the strait like a strobe light at low altitude. Not one Iranian weapon reached the tanker column. Inside the corvette formation, the radar operators are reporting system errors. They are seeing ghost contacts, missiles appearing on their screens from directions that have no ships in them. The fire control system on the lead corvette is generating lock warnings from 4 separate active seekers simultaneously, which is physically impossible unless 4 separate ships are painting the same vessel at the same moment. The fleet commander is trying to reach his coastal command cell on the encrypted radio net. He is getting nothing back but static. This is because the EA-18G Growler, that has been orbiting at 35,000 feet since before the engagement began, has just activated its next-generation jammer. The NGJ does not simply broadcast interference across a wide frequency band the way older jamming systems did. It is precise. It identifies the specific emission frequency of each individual radar and communication system it wants to suppress and generates a custom waveform that exploits the hardware architecture of that specific model of equipment. The Iranian corvettes are running a mix of Russian-supplied and domestically produced fire control and communication systems. The Growler's electronic warfare system has a library of every radar and radio frequency profile for every piece of equipment in the IRGC naval inventory. It does not jam the Iranian fleet. It surgically removes each system's ability to function, one by one, while leaving the channel the Iranians use for distress calls deliberately open. The fleet commander is not in a blackout. He is in a selective blackout, designed to leave him just enough capability to understand what is happening to him without being able to do anything about it. He now understands what is happening to him. His missiles are gone. His fire control radars are feeding him corrupted data. His encrypted command link to Bandar Abbas is dead. His ships are being painted by active seekers from vessels he cannot locate on any display. And somewhere in the darkness ahead of him, the tanker convoy is continuing its transit through the strait without any change in speed or course, as if his attack never happened. He gives the order to withdraw toward the shallow coastal waters north of the shipping lane, where the depth falls below the operational threshold for deep-draft U.S. warships and where his corvettes have practiced evasion maneuvers in previous exercises. The IRGC doctrine for coastal retreat relies on the assumption that American surface combatants will not follow light-fast attack vessels into littoral water depths below 50 feet. It is a reasonable assumption. It is also the assumption the operation was specifically designed to exploit. It was wrong because the response to that retreat was not coming from a surface combatant. The USS Michigan, an Ohio-class guided missile submarine, had been positioned in the deep-water approach channel south of the Iranian coastal shelf for 72 hours before the engagement began. At the moment the Iranian corvettes turned north toward their escape route, the Michigan received targeting data through its acoustic data link and executed a Tomahawk salvo from a position the Iranian Coastal Defense Network had no knowledge of and no ability to detect. The Tomahawks were not aimed at the retreating corvettes. They were aimed at the 3 coastal missile battery sites on the cliffs above Bandar Abbas, the same batteries whose radar emissions had been mapped by the E-2D Hawkeye over the preceding 6 hours of patient surveillance. The missiles flew terrain-following routes through the valleys of the coastal range, below the engagement envelope of every surface-to-air system Iran had positioned to protect those sites, and struck the power nodes, the radar antenna, and the hardened launcher doors in a sequence strike that arrived across all 3 sites within a window of 40 seconds. The secondary explosions from the stored anti-ship missiles inside those bunkers were large enough to be detected by seismic sensors in 3 neighboring countries. By 0224 hours, 15 minutes after the Iranian corvettes fired their opening salvo, the operational picture had resolved completely. 2 Iranian Sina-class corvettes were dead in the water, struck by AGM-158C LRASM rounds released from a pair of F-35C aircraft that had been holding a low observable orbit at the edge of Iranian radar coverage since the convoy entered the strait. The other 2 corvettes had survived the engagement but were operating without radar, without encrypted communications, and without any shore-based command authority to report to. They were not a threat. They were witnesses. The 3 coastal battery sites that represented the fixed backbone of Iran's Strait of Hormuz denial strategy were destroyed, and the tanker convoy was on schedule. In the Coastal Operations Center at Bandar Abbas, the IRGC commander is looking at a status board that has gone almost entirely red in 15 minutes. He has lost ships, battery sites, and communication infrastructure. He has also lost something that does not appear on any status board. He has lost the intelligence picture that he built over 8 months, because every radar he turned on tonight was logged, every frequency he transmitted on was recorded, and every pattern of behavior his fleet demonstrated during the approach and attack has been processed into a targeting database that now knows more about how the IRGC operates in this strait than the IRGC itself has ever formally 2024 documented. He handed the U.S. Navy a detailed technical manual on how to defeat the next version of this attack before the first version had finished failing. In Tehran, the Supreme National Security Council is convening an emergency session. The IRGC is already preparing a public statement claiming the operation achieved its objectives and that the convoy was forced to divert. The statement will be released within the hour. It will be contradicted within minutes by satellite imagery and AIS tracking data showing every tanker continuing its original course through the strait and arriving at its destination port on schedule. The lie will not survive the day, but it will be told anyway, because the alternative is admitting publicly that a fleet action that took 8 months to plan was dismantled in 15 minutes by a system that was never fully visible and never fully disclosed. Now take a step back from the engagement timeline and look at what this confrontation actually means in strategic and economic terms, because the numbers tell a story that the kinetics alone do not capture. Iran invested approximately $4 billion over the previous decade building the integrated naval and coastal defense architecture that was designed to make the Strait of Hormuz a prohibitively expensive waterway for the U.S. Navy to operate in. That architecture rested on 3 pillars: fast attack corvettes capable of overwhelming escort defenses with saturation launches, hardened coastal missile batteries positioned to engage shipping from elevated cliff positions, and the doctrine of area denial. The idea that the combination of volume and geography would impose costs on the U.S. that would eventually make consistent escort operations politically and financially unsustainable. All 3 pillars were removed from the board tonight. The corvettes are dead or disabled. The batteries are destroyed. And the doctrine has been demonstrated to fail against an adversary that does not operate the way the doctrine assumed. The cost of the U.S. operation to achieve that outcome was under $30 million in ordnance and sortie costs. The ratio is not a tactical advantage, it is a structural one. Iran cannot rebuild this capability in any time frame that restores deterrence before the diplomatic and economic consequences of this failure play out. The insurance rates for Gulf shipping will drop within 48 hours of this engagement becoming public. The tankers will keep moving, the oil will keep flowing. And the Strait of Hormuz will remain what it has been for the past 4 decades of U.S. naval dominance in the region. Not an Iranian pressure point, but an American operating environment. The deepest lesson here is not about missiles or electronic warfare or submarine positioning, though all of those matter. The deepest lesson is about decision speed. The IRGC operates through a command chain that runs from the fleet commander on the water to the operations center in Bandar Abbas, to the Joint Chiefs of the Armed Forces in Tehran, to the Supreme Leaders Security Council. Every engagement authorization, every escalation decision, every change in orders has to travel that chain in both directions. In a 15-minute engagement where the critical decisions happen in the first 45 seconds, that chain is not a command structure, it is a delay. By the time the authorization for the first missile salvo had been formally approved and transmitted, the U.S. system had already detected the thermal signatures of the launches, allocated interceptors, and fired them. The IRGC was operating on a decision cycle measured in minutes. The kill web was operating on one measured in seconds. This is what it means to fight an algorithm. The Iranian fleet commander is a skilled officer executing a rational plan built on sound tactical logic. He is not making mistakes in the traditional sense. He is operating at human speed in an engagement that has already been resolved at machine speed before he finishes giving his first order. There is no counter-move available to a human decision cycle that closes the gap against a system architecture that completes its observe, orient, decide, and act loop in the time it takes his second-in-command to reach him on the radio. At 0400 hours, the first tanker in the convoy clears the western exit of the strait and enters the open Gulf of Oman. The sun is not yet up. The water is dark and flat. The convoy continues at 12 knots, steady, unhurried, on schedule. Behind them in the strait, a thin layer of smoke is dispersing on the wind above the Iranian coastal cliffs. In 2 hours, it will be gone. The only evidence it left will be in the satellite imagery archives and the targeting databases of the U.S. Fifth Fleet, where tonight's engagement has already been processed into lessons learned and applied to the planning assumptions for the next one. The USS Cole did not change course during the entire engagement. Her crew did not celebrate when the last intercept confirmed. The tactical action officer logged the engagement, updated the status board, and resumed standard patrol speed behind the convoy. For the sailors aboard that ship, this was not a victory. It was a Tuesday, and that is the most devastating thing Iran could possibly learn about the adversary it just tested. If you want to understand how this kill web actually functions and what it means for every future confrontation in the Gulf, subscribe. We break down the real architecture behind these engagements, not the version that fits in a news headline. And tell me in the comments, if Iran rebuilds and comes back with twice the corvettes and twice the missiles, does the math change? Think carefully before you answer, because the answer depends entirely on which part of the equation you think is the constraint. The scenario described in this video is a technical and tactical analysis based on real military assets, published defense capabilities, and documented regional tensions. The specific engagement sequences are hypothetical dramatizations created to illustrate U.S. Navy Integrated Strike Group doctrine and kill web architecture.